Daniel had everything that most people dream of: a well-paying job, a modern apartment in the city, and a social media feed filled with smiling pictures. But behind those pictures, behind the polite smiles and professional demeanor, he was fighting a battle that no one could see. Every morning, he struggled to get out of bed. It felt like an invisible weight pressed down on his chest, making even the simplest tasks feel overwhelming. His once bright and ambitious spirit had faded into the shadows of self-doubt and exhaustion. At work, he forced himself to be productive, but his mind was clouded with endless negative thoughts. At home, silence greeted him, amplifying his loneliness. He had stopped painting, the one thing that had always brought him joy. The colors that once danced on his canvas now felt lifeless. He wanted to talk to someone, but every time he tried, a voice inside told him, "No one will understand. They'll think you're weak." So he kept his pain hidden, hoping it would eventually disappear. But it didn't. It only grew stronger. One evening, after another long day of pretending, Daniel sat alone in his apartment, staring at a blank canvas. His heart ached with frustration. He grabbed a brush, dipped it in paint, and tried to create something. Anything. But no matter how hard he tried, the strokes felt meaningless. Tears welled up in his eyes. "Why am I like this?" he thought. "Why can't I just be happy?" The emotions that he had suppressed for so long finally erupted. He threw the brush across the room, watching as it left a smear of paint on the white wall. He sank to the floor, his body shaking. For the first time, he realized this wasn't just sadness. This was something deeper, something he could no longer ignore. That night, Daniel made a decision. He couldn't keep living like this. He needed help. The next day, with no particular destination in mind, Daniel wandered the city streets. He found himself outside a small bookstore. A warm light glowed from inside, offering a quiet sense of comfort. He hesitated for a moment before stepping in. Rows of books surrounded him, the scent of old pages filling the air. As he browsed aimlessly, an elderly man behind the counter looked up and smiled. "You look like someone searching for something," the man said gently. Daniel hesitated but nodded. The man, who introduced himself as Mr. Lewis, offered Daniel a cup of tea and invited him to sit. There was something about his presence, calm, understanding, that made Daniel feel safe. As they talked, Daniel found himself opening up. He spoke about his sleepless nights, his fading passion, and the emptiness that consumed him. Mr. Lewis listened carefully. Then he said something that Daniel would never forget. "The mind is a battlefield, but you can learn to fight." He told Daniel about his own struggles with depression, how he had once felt lost and hopeless. But over time, he had found ways to manage it. "You don't have to win the battle overnight," Mr. Lewis said. "You just have to take the first step." He handed Daniel a small notebook. "Start here. Write down what you feel. No filters. Just let it out." Daniel accepted the notebook hesitantly. "There are 3 things that saved me," Mr. Lewis continued. "Journaling, exercise, and mindful breathing. Try them. Give yourself time." Daniel wasn't sure if it would work, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a tiny spark of hope. At first, the new habits felt strange. Journaling was the hardest. Writing down his thoughts forced him to confront emotions he had been avoiding. But as the days passed, he noticed that putting his feelings on paper made them feel less overwhelming. Exercise was another challenge. His body felt sluggish, his mind resistant. But after a few weeks of daily walks, something changed. His energy levels improved, and for the first time in months, he felt a sense of accomplishment. Mindful breathing became his refuge. Whenever anxiety crept in, he closed his eyes and focused on his breath. Inhale, exhale. Slowly, he learned to stay present. As weeks turned into months, something incredible happened. He picked up his paintbrush again. This time, he didn't paint for perfection. He painted to express. His emotions flowed onto the canvas. Blues for sadness, fiery reds for anger, soft yellows for hope. It wasn't easy. There were days when his mind whispered, "You'll never get better." But he remembered Mr. Lewis's words. Small steps lead to big changes. So he kept going. Not every day was good. There were setbacks, days when the weight of depression threatened to pull him back. But Daniel had learned something important. He didn't have to fight alone. He reconnected with old friends, choosing to surround himself with people who genuinely cared. He distanced himself from toxic environments that drained his energy. One evening, as he was walking home, he passed the bookstore and decided to visit Mr. Lewis. "I see something different in your eyes," Mr. Lewis said with a knowing smile. Daniel nodded. "I'm not completely okay, but I'm better than before." "That's all that matters," Mr. Lewis said. "Healing isn't about never feeling pain again. It's about learning how to live despite it." A year later, Daniel stood in an art gallery, surrounded by people admiring his work. His latest painting, titled Hope, stood at the center. It was a blend of dark and light colors, a visual representation of his journey. The storm of emotions he had once feared was now captured in something beautiful. As he watched people connect with his art, he realized something profound. His pain had not been meaningless. It had led him to this moment. It had shaped him, taught him resilience, and given him the strength to help others. A young woman approached him and said, "Your painting, it speaks to me. I've been struggling with depression, and seeing this makes me feel less alone." Daniel smiled, his heart full. For the first time in years, he truly believed there was always hope. Daniel's journey teaches us that depression is not a sign of weakness. It is a battle, but one that can be fought with patience, support, and small daily steps. Healing doesn't happen overnight, but every step forward, no matter how small, brings us closer to the light. If you are struggling, remember, you are not alone, and your story is not over. Love,